Time.
Gentlelady yields back. Professor Smith, in your in your written testimony, you said that the lead prosecutor, Matthew Colangelo, in his opening statement in the court, accused President Trump of violating the Federal Election Campaign Act. But the FEC didn't bring charges, I think you've said a couple times. Is that true?
That's correct.
And the Department of Justice didn't bring charges.
That's correct.
And if President Trump's campaign had paid for it, it wouldn't have been reported until after the election. Is that right?
That's correct.
And did President Trump's campaign have the money to pay for it?
Yes, they had plenty of money.
And like $7-8 million still on hand on election day, I think, right?
Yes.
And certainly President Trump had the money to pay for it. He's not.
Yes, he'd already spent over $60 million on it.
Yeah, he had. So they'd already done that. Was it a political contribution?
No, I do not believe so for reasons stated. I can elaborate on those now, but
Not only do you not believe so, their star witness didn't believe so. Michael Cohen said he was working clear back in 2011 to deal with this Miss Daniels making the allegations and wouldn't make this public, and he was doing it for other reasons. Isn't that correct?
Yes, they had been concerned about Daniels for a long time and keeping her quiet.
So the obligation wasn't caused by President Trump's candidacy for President of the United States. Is that right?
No, it was not.
Okay, Mr. Fahey, in your written testimony, you said one of the most alarming aspects of the case is that the fraud, quote, fraud, did not involve anyone losing money or even being harmed in any way. To the extent that the ledger entries were inaccurate, they were entered into the books of a private company that understood what they were for. It is unheard of for a fraud case to be brought where no losses were suffered. So there weren't any losses in this case at all, were there?
Yeah, that's what makes this so remarkable. And just, I can't even imagine someone bringing a fraud case to the United States Attorney's Office where nobody lost money, there were no victims, and no one was worse off at the end of it. It just makes it laughable, even before you get to steps 2 through probably 20 that make this case really absurd to have been brought to begin with.
It wasn't a contribution. If it was a contribution, it wouldn't have been reported until after the election, and no one suffered any losses, and yet they bring this charge against President Trump. I find that just amazing. If that's not political motivation, I don't know, because what other motivation could there be?
It's really almost inarguable at this point that the motivation for this case was political. It's really, I've never heard a serious argument that it should have been prosecuted otherwise. I know Mr. Wu might have one, but I just haven't heard that, because it seems political from the inception all the way to the end.
Yeah. Wasn't a contribution, wouldn't have been reported even if it was, if they paid it out of the campaign. No one suffered loss, yet there was some kind of conspiracy to impact an election. But that's not the worst of it. The worst of it is they didn't tell the defendant what the crime was he was being charged with. Isn't that right, Judge?
That's correct. Right from the indictment, Donald Trump was charged with falsifying business records. To elevate that crime to a felony, he had to be concealing or committing other crimes.
When did the defendant in this trial, in this case, learn what he was being charged with?
At the end of the trial.
At the end of the trial. That's not supposed to happen in America, is it, Judge?
No, that is illegal.
So not only did he not know what he's being charged with, at the end of the trial, when he learned what it was, the judge also told the jury, oh, you don't have to be unanimous in finding what we just discovered the charge actually was.
Yeah, it's an extraordinarily egregious error to tell a jury they don't have to be unanimous. And I might add, by the way, those charges, the 3 additional ones, were never specified. They're described generally, so we don't know what exactly the jury thought was the illegality that was committed by Donald Trump. We have a very inspecific verdict.
Campaign finance expert says it wasn't a contribution, and even if it was a contribution, if they treated it as a contribution, paid it out of the campaign, it wouldn't have been reported until after the election, so there's no conspiracy to influence the election. No one suffered any harm or fraud in the initial case, former prosecutor tells us, and the judge tells us that the defendant didn't know what he was charged with until the end of the trial, and the judge gave instructions to the jury. Never mind the fact the judge should have recused himself, which you point out in your written testimony, Judge. The judge didn't tell the jury, or told the jury you don't have to be unanimous. But the real thing here is the opportunity cost. And you raised this in your testimony, Mr. Fahey. The opportunity cost. When Alvin Bragg did the day 1 memo, says we are not going to charge all these felonies, we're going to bring them down to misdemeanors and let the bad guys roam the streets of New York. How that squares with what happened here, that to me is the real issue. That's the issue that most Americans see, like, we're going to do this to the former president of the United States, meanwhile, take felony charges against really bad guys on the street and bring them down to misdemeanors. That's the opportunity cost here, I believe, in Manhattan. You get the last word, Mr. Fahey.
Yeah, exactly. When you're letting carjackers out on bail or illegal immigrants that assault police officers aren't getting prosecuted, but this is the way you're using your time, in addition to the fact you run on a soft on crime policy and then you do take the most creative, aggressive approach to this crime, it's hard to argue it's anything other than a political motivation.
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas.
Okay, I got a lot of ground to cover. I do want to clarify, Mr. Fahey, when you